Hey everybody. Okay, so for our first online science lesson, we're going to learn about the parts of plants and then parts of a flower. So we're going to combine these two lessons. To learn about this, we're going to use some celery, and I'm sure you all have plants or access to plants at home. Celery is a little easier way to see the way that water and nutrients move through a plant. And then we'll also use a carnation to kind of show what happens when water moves through a plant. So first, we're going to talk about the roots, stem, and leaves of a plant and what those purposes are. So if you take your celery, okay, and we got not pre-cut celery from the grocery store, the roots are usually attached here, okay, and they cut them off and make it look kind of pretty for us for the grocery store. So the roots are here, right? So it's in the ground, and you can see the dirt still attached to my celery. That's why you wash your vegetables before you eat them, okay? So the celery sits like this, and the roots hold the plant in place, right, so that it doesn't move. And that's what helps fight against erosion. So it holds the plants in place, but it also helps absorb nutrients and food for the plant. Okay, then the stem, these guys, they help transport the food, the water, the nutrients to the rest of the plant, okay? And then the leaves in here, and there's all kinds of leaves inside my celery, these make the food. So they use the sun and the air to make the food for the plant to help it to continue to grow. So those are the parts of a plant with a stalk of celery, okay? Then if we take this piece of celery that I cut, you can kind of see it a little bit closer up. Here's where the roots would be, okay? And you can kind of see the veins here from where in the stem where the water would be transported. And if you have celery at home, you can kind of maybe ask first, but play with it and see how it works, okay? And you can kind of see it in here, and then this is where it would continue to grow and where the leaves would be, right? So you can even break the celery up, and we know that celery is really stringy, right? So there's one of the veins that kind of helps hold the plant up, but also transport that food and water and all the nutrients that the celery needs to grow. Then we have other parts that maybe aren't necessarily for a stalk of celery, but there's flowers, right? So we have flowers and they help the plant reproduce and they make seeds. So like for example, we have a carnation flower. Okay, there's seeds in there somewhere, okay? And all kinds of things that help that flower reproduce and grow. The flowers also attract pollinators like bees to help, spread so that the flowers can continue and reproduce and make more flowers. Fruits, so the fruits are developed from the flowers and they protect the seeds. So fruits for all plants look different, right? So we have apple, that's a fruit, and inside the apple are the apple seeds, which would help us grow an apple tree. Bark on a tree and thorns on other plants like roses, they protect the plant from predators, from birds or whatever else might try to eat the plant. Vines help the plant spread out to find more sunlight, more water, more space, so it's not so crowded. Sometimes plants that have vines can't grow in small spaces, so they need to spread out on a fence or something to get that space and get all the sunlight that they need to continue to grow. And then we have movable leaves like the Venus flytrap that we know waits there and it waits and it holds its mouth open. It looks like a mouth, right? And then when something touches the inside of it, it closes and eats that fly or gnat or whatever lands on it. So not only does it help get food, but it also protects that flower and that plant. So again, looking at the inside of our celery, we can see the veins and see where our celery kind of moves its food. There you go, that's a good one. You can see the stalk okay, in the veins of the celery. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take my jar. I have a celery stalk inside the jar and a carnation, a white carnation, okay? And I have already put some water in here, but I'm gonna add some red food coloring. And we're gonna see the celery stalk is going to show us what is happening on the inside of the carnation, because it's hard for us to see. So the celery stalk is going to kind of help us see what's going on the inside of the carnation, and maybe what you might want to predict what's going to happen to our pretty white carnation here. So why don't you take a second while I add the food coloring and make a transition? Why don't you make a prediction in your science journal about what's going to happen to our white carnation when I add red food coloring to our clear jar of water? I've got it stirred up. It's no longer clear, so we're gonna have to see, and I'll make another science video for us in a couple days and see, you know, what happens to our celery stalk and what happens to our white carnation in you know, a couple days time. What can we see for our changes for our flower? Okay, so I'm gonna put that to the side. And now we're gonna move into parts of a flower. So you'll wanna have your parts of a flower worksheet ready. And I am going to switch over to our little camera and show you the parts of a lily. Okay, so I'm gonna do it in a few stages for you. And let's actually see if I can share with see if I can do this. There we go. Okay, great. So first, I'm gonna make this a little bit bigger so that we can see it. Okay, first we're gonna see this stage of the lily. It's kind of a pod, okay? It hasn't bloomed yet, right? So the flower is still there, but it's protected. And if I left it, maybe we'll have to see in a couple days, but if I left it attached to the plant, it would eventually bloom into the beautiful lily that we know, right? So these we're gonna label. These are the sepals. They look like small leaves and protect the flower before it opens. So we're gonna label that with the sepal, okay? Then we're going to look at, just to kind of see the stages of bloom here. This lily flower is almost bloomed, and you can see the sepals are kind of changing here, right? And sometimes, like on our carnation, you can see the sepals stick around and they continue to look like leaves. On our lily, they look a little different, which is okay. So this is, I don't know if this is really the second stage, but this was the next stage that our little lily stem had that I thought would be good to show. Okay, so then once our lily flower has bloomed, this is what it looks like. And we'll see a lot of these flowers around Easter time, okay? And I want to draw your attention to these little things hanging off, okay? These are the stamens, okay? This is where, and it's not just this yellow-orange part, it's the whole thing, okay? And because they're attached to something, okay? This is where the pollen is. So we need to be really careful because the pollen will stain. So you want to make sure if you do this at home, that you don't drop them on the carpet or get them on your clothes because they do stain. But I'll kind of pull it out so that you can see if I can get one attached. And they do come off fairly easily when you move them around too much. But so you can see the pollen coming off on our white paper. And if you, even if, you know, you kind of rub it around, it's turning the paper yellow. Okay, so just be really careful. And we'll see a lot of pollen in the springtime when things start blooming. And, you know, in the fall when trees start losing their leaves, we kind of see pollen at different times of the year. Springtime is a big one for pollen, so we'll notice that our allergies maybe are acting up a little bit more. But do be careful if you do this at home that you don't get this on the carpet. Okay, so we'll write that down on our lily. This is the stamen. Okay, and that's where the pollen is, okay? Then on our lily, the next part I want you to see is the pistil. So this is the pistil, okay? And it's at the center of our stamens, okay? And the pistil helps pollen move from here down to the center of the plant where the ovary is. So you can kind of see it's hard to see even up close, but there's little tiny receptors in there that the pollen, and remember pollen's a very fine powder, so it'll go through there and it'll go down to the center of the plant, okay? So we'll add that. Let's see if I can move this for you. We'll add that here. This is, okay, the pistil. All right, so then looking at the inside of the flower, if you can see. So on the inside, okay, down here, and let's see if I can kind of get to it. Inside here is what's called the ovary, okay? And that's where it changes into a fruit after the pollen reaches it, right? So the seeds develop inside here. And I don't know that any seeds are developed on the inside of here, but we can try. I don't know if that's gonna work. Sometimes, but sometimes not. Well, it doesn't look like it. But anyways, that's how the pollen is used, okay? So I'll write that down here. Okay. And then finally, we have the petals, right? And we all know what the petals are for a flower. And they're usually bright and colorful, and they attract pollinators like bees or butterflies to help the flower reproduce. So they'll take pollen from here and they'll go to another lily and to another flower, you know, and then, you know, the wind will blow and the pollen falls off of the bee. So the petals are important for attracting pollinators. So that's our last part, okay? So in a couple days, we'll check on our, let's see if we can put that under, we'll check on our 2 experiments here and see how they change over a couple days in the reddish orangish water here. And we'll see what we can determine about how water moves through a plant. Thanks for joining.